Vegans rejoice, because with the release of Perennial Order, Soulslike Cosmic Horror now comes in a plant-based option. Well, at least if those plants were of the parasitic variety that consume and contort living beings until they're unrecognizable monstrosities that skirt the darkest limits of our imagination. Real wholesome stuff. If there is an antithesis to cozy gaming, Perennial Order is perhaps it. Those who know me and have watched enough of my reviews may know that I'm really not a fan of Souls-like games. It's not so much that I find them difficult as much as I find them deeply annoying experiences that don't respect the player's time, usually. But I must say, to both the diehard crowd and skeptics of the genre like myself, Perennial Order hits differently. Maybe that's partially due to its boss rush structure that balances dazzling multi-stage fights with slower, more methodical exploration and platforming, but either way, while the genre's quintessential difficulty remains intact, its tedium and repetition is very intentionally absent, and the result is an experience as mesmerizing as it is bleak, if you're up for the challenge. If you're up for supporting honest and thorough indie gaming coverage as well, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel, as well as checking out our Patreon for some awesome perks and that warm, fuzzy feeling that comes with helping out the content creators you, hopefully, love. Let's start with Perennial Order's presentation, and in particular, its art style. Perennial Order's visual aesthetic is nothing shy of exceptional. Its world is a brooding, ominous painting brought to life and injects an astonishing amount of creativity and color into its visual design without compromising on its uniquely bleak vision. This remains true of not just the environments and interactable scenery, but of course the boss fights themselves. In a sense, this game is no more Dark Souls than it is Shadow of the Colossus, with a dazzling variety of visually and mechanically diverse beasts to fight, many of whom are large enough to not even fit on the screen, but they all look, and sound for that matter, utterly incredible. You know, in a grotesque kind of way. My senses rattled every time the suitably named Corpse Orchard boss opened itself up to reveal a motion-sensing core I'd have to freeze in place for as it lit the sky red with its piercing scream. And I ran in panic every time the razor-toothed abyssum peeked its eyes through the pitch blackness of its labyrinthine cave and searched for me with its brightly lit gaze. Every environment in the game looks distinct from every other too, and the way it allows trees and branches and bushes to obscure your vision as you make your way through its untamed landscapes adds a feeling of claustrophobia that's tremendously effective. If you ever doubted a game could successfully match the art style of Disco Elysium's character portraits with bloodborne, spine-chilling abominations, let Perennial Order be the game to change your mind about that extremely specific thing. And while its relatively simplistic animations may not tickle everyone's acorns, they're arguably a great choice for telegraphing specific attacks for each boss, and I certainly support that. All this is backed by great music and fantastic ambient sound effects that amplify the peculiar feeling that you should not be here. Oh, and it's pretty great on the Steam Deck too, just saying. There is a story to Perennial Order, but one arguably less about your personal journey and more about the world itself. You are a perennial knight, a sort of undead construct of plant and human birthed from an eldritch creature referred to as the Monarch Mother. Upon exiting her gracious womb, which is literally how it's referred to, not just me being creepy, you're told in no uncertain terms to end the pestilent horrors that threaten our beautiful garden. Your journey to fell the beasts in question will take you all across the land, through safe havens and very not safe hellholes alike, talking to a variety of characters and learning more about their world through personal stories and often vague but poetic exposition. Perennial Order's writing is pretty fantastic all around, with a tone that does phenomenal work of giving context to this horrible place without spoon-feeding you answers about its lore. Those looking for a more straightforward narrative aren't likely to find it here, but if you're open-minded to a fascinating world and the kind of vibes that burrow right under your skin, you'll be in good company. There are a number of ways that Perennial Order gently deviates from Souls-like tradition, and its core gameplay is chief among them. What's here ostensibly takes the overall feel of Souls-like melee combat and distills it down to its purest form. You move with the left stick, then hold and release the right stick in whatever direction you please to attack. Releasing at exactly the right time, no earlier or later, will grant you a critical hit with a 50% damage bonus, which you will absolutely need. You also have a dash that gives you a brief window shield of invulnerability, but is limited by the number of wisps you have. These small but brightly lit consumables follow you around, 3 at a time by default, and are used when dashing or activating your instincts, which are special abilities that I'll get to in a bit. Wisps will regenerate, and fairly quickly at that, but failing to keep track of them in the heat of battle will ensure a swift and ugly defeat before long. Beyond this, there are no consumable healing items, no real variety of weapons, and no RPG leveling mechanics or complex stats to track. In fact, there's not much of anything to track at all, as the minimalist user interface will only give you the bare essentials of moment-to-moment information, and there's no sense in a health bar since you'll die in a single hit. That's right, the developers of Perennial Order are so confident in their ability to design brutal but fair boss encounters that they'll force you to complete them without getting hit even once. And if that sounds intimidating to you, well, it damn well should. The aforementioned instincts replace any sort of RPG leveling mechanics or stat tracking in Perennial Order, which in my opinion is a brilliant way to add numerous playstyles to the mix while forcing you to be careful in your choices. Instincts are powers for your Perennial Knight gained by defeating bosses, completing side objectives, or exploring the world thoroughly. You can equip an instinct that allows you to trigger 2 dashes in a row while only consuming 1 wisp, or allows you to parry and counterattack your opponent if you're confident in your timing, or even one that materially elongates your blade to impale your opponents from a greater distance. Come on, make that sexual somehow, I dare you. You can even equip multiple instincts at a time, but they're limited by your pool of memory points, which you can gain more of by completing a variety of fun but difficult platforming challenges scattered throughout the world. Perennial Order gives you enough tools to defeat its enemies with whatever you have, but makes it clear as day that engaging with all of its systems and exploring your surroundings thoroughly will give you a leg up that, trust me, you will probably need. Once I had enough instincts, I was making builds that may not have lowered the difficulty a ton, but created interesting synergies that made impossible seeming battles feel doable with the right level of patience and determination. Because even with instincts around to give you a boost, Perennial Order is hard. It's really, really hard. Most bosses took me dozens upon dozens of tries to finally defeat, and I'm sure there are at least a couple that took nearly 100 attempts to finally claim victory. But there are several silver linings to take note of before you find that too discouraging. The first is that this is a Soulslike that finally respects your goddamn time. Every single boss will have a checkpoint directly before it, and the time elapsed between dying and being right in the heat of battle again is generally 5 seconds or less. Secondly, some, not all or even most, but some bosses actually have checkpoints between phases. This is a godsend because Perennial Order's bosses follow no predictable formats to speak of, neither in the health they have, which is deliberately obscured through the developer's orthodox take on a minimal UI, nor in the way their often multi-stage battles unfold. You might have a stealth sequence followed by a chase sequence followed by a properly hellish fight to the death, or you might have a boss that dies in one hit if you can possibly hope to catch it. And then there's my personal favorite, an extraordinarily vicious game of chess where you are one of the very vulnerable pieces. Every battle is tweaked to near perfection so that its difficulty nearly breaks you without letting you want to give up, and accordingly it's not going to pull any crap that requires you to retread more than a couple minutes of progress. Third silver lining. In most parts of the game, you can tackle available bosses in any order you wish, and if one is giving you too much trouble, I'll not only tell you, but highly recommend to you that it's worth venturing elsewhere and coming back when you have more useful instincts that can give you the edge needed to win. And fourth, you lose nothing by dying. There's no currency to collect or RPG leveling to worry about, so the only thing that happens when you meet your inevitable end is to get back up and try again. It's brutal, but it's fair. Attacks are well telegraphed and there's not much in the way of trial and error. Learning how to successfully dodge a really tricky attack feels incredibly satisfying, and after dozens upon dozens of defeats, that incredible moment of victory had me sometimes literally pumping my fist up in the air and shouting relieved obscenities at the body of the beast I just brutally slaughtered. And my god does it feel good. That said, you might justifiably wonder why in my little silver lining spiel I didn't mention what should arguably be the most obvious feature in the game to help the player out in their struggle, and that is the fact that the entirety of Perennial Order supports local and online 2-player co-op. Let me put it this way. Co-op is a great feature, and for certain bosses it's a really good time, but frankly, at least in its current state, co-op will not really help you. In fact, in my testing of it, I found the co-op version of the game to be significantly, nut-crunchingly more difficult than solo play. While I can't pretend to know exactly how much each boss's health is boosted by the existence of another player, in the ones we tried, it felt really significant, perhaps as much as double, and in an extremely difficult one-hit kill game where a boss may have 2 phases, and it's highly likely one player will die in the first one, requiring the player left alive to deal with a much more difficult second phase than if they'd just tried it solo was just too much to handle. I'm hoping they tweak co-op difficulty to be a little more reasonable post-launch, because as it stands, I found it to mostly exist for only the most sadistically minded duos out there. Overall though, I must admit, I can't review Perennial Order from the perspective of a Souls-like fan. I'm not one. Even the ones I've loved and made substantial progress in, like Sekiro and Bloodborne, I also kind of hated for constantly wasting my time and delivering a level of punishment that felt less constructive and more straight up mean. But Perennial Order is just a phenomenal game. It may not go far enough in terms of being accessible for folks who want to tweak its difficulty, but its demands of the player are inherently reasonable while keeping the skill requirement extremely high. It's one of the single hardest games I've ever played, genuinely, but I had an incredible time doing so. As many of you know, we here at I Dream of Indie Games rate games using bronze, silver, and golden genie lamps of approval for titles that are good, great, and absolutely essential, respectively, with the Rusty Lamp and Indie Krampus reserved only for titles where things have gone quite a bit wrong. Without a doubt, Perennial Order has solidified itself as not only an obvious golden genie, but one of the best games of 2024.